My name is Samuel Hartwell, and I've been ranching in the Colorado Territory for 15 years. At 42, I've seen enough of human nature to know that cruelty often masquerades as righteousness, and that sometimes the loneliest souls are the ones who need defending the most. It was a scorching August day in 1885 when I rode into the small town of Cedar Ridge for supplies. The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street, and most sensible folks had retreated to whatever shade they could find, but as I approached the general store, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The sound of cruel laughter mixed with jeering voices. A crowd had gathered near the church steps, and their attention was focused on a lone figure sitting on a wooden crate in the blazing sun. As I dismounted from my horse, Thunder, I could see it was a woman young, probably no more than 25, with auburn hair that caught the sunlight despite being disheveled and dirty. Her dress, once white but now stained with dust and sweat, hung loosely on her thin frame. "Look at her," shouted Martha Prescott, the banker's wife, her voice dripping with disdain. "Sitting there like she owns the place. The nerve of some people. Shameful," agreed Reverend Collins, shaking his head with theatrical disapproval. "A woman of her condition should know better than to show her face in decent society." I moved closer, trying to understand what had stirred up such hatred in these supposedly God-fearing people. The woman on the crate kept her head down, her hands folded in her lap, enduring the verbal assault with a dignity that impressed me even from a distance. "She's been sitting there for 3 hours, whispered old Pete Morrison to his companion. "Just sitting there like she's waiting for something. It ain't natural. Probably waiting for another man to take pity on her," cackled Mrs. Henderson, the school teacher, "though I can't imagine who'd want damaged goods like that." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd heard enough to understand what was happening. Here, this woman, whoever she was, had been branded with some kind of scandal, and the good people of Cedar Ridge were taking pleasure in her humiliation. I studied her more carefully. Despite the dirt and exhaustion, I could see she had been beautiful, once probably still was. Under different circumstances, her posture spoke of education and breeding. The way she held herself even under such duress suggested she came from quality stock. But something had brought her low, and now she was fair game for the vultures. "Maybe we should get the sheriff," suggested Tom Bradley, the blacksmith. "Have her moved along. She's bad for business. Sitting there like that. Where's she supposed to go?" asked a voice I didn't recognize. "Woman's got nowhere else to be." "That's her problem," snapped Mrs. Prescott. "Should have thought of that. Before she what?" I found myself saying, my voice cutting through the crowd's chatter like a knife. The group turned to look at me, and I could see the mixture of surprise and annoyance on their faces. I wasn't exactly a stranger in Cedar Ridge, but I wasn't one of their inner circle either. I kept to myself mostly, coming to town only when necessary. "Sam Hartwell," acknowledged Reverend Collins with a tight smile. "Didn't see you there." "I asked a question," I said, stepping closer to the crowd. "Before she what?" The Reverend's face flushed red. "Now see here, Sam, this is a private matter." "Doesn't look private to me," I interrupted, gesturing to the crowd. "Looks like a public spectacle, so I'll ask again. What exactly has this woman done to deserve such treatment?" The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Prescott lifted her chin defiantly. "If you must know, she's a fallen woman. Came to town 3 days ago with nothing but the clothes on her back and a story about being abandoned by her husband. And that makes her deserving of mockery. It makes her a cautionary tale," said the Reverend pompously. "A reminder of what happens when women stray from the path of righteousness." I looked at the woman again. She still hadn't raised her head, but I could see her shoulders trembling slightly. Whether from exhaustion, heat, or emotion, I couldn't tell. "Has she asked anyone for anything?" I asked. "Well, no," admitted Pete Morrison. "But has she caused any trouble? Stolen anything? Disturbed the peace?" "That's not the point," began Mrs. Henderson. "That's exactly the point," I said firmly. "You're all standing here in the heat, wasting your afternoon tormenting a woman who's done nothing but exist in your presence. Don't you have better things to do?" The crowd began to murmur among themselves, some looking ashamed, others defiant, but I wasn't done. "Reverend," I said, turning to Collins, "didn't your Jesus spend time with prostitutes and tax collectors? Seems to me he had something to say about casting stones." The Reverend's face went from red to purple. "How dare you?" "I dare because someone needs to," I replied. "This woman is sitting in the sun, minding her own business, and you're all acting like she's the devil himself." I walked through the crowd, which parted reluctantly before me, until I stood directly in front of the woman. Up close, I could see the exhaustion etched in every line of her face, the way her hands shook slightly from hunger or fatigue. "Ma'am," I said gently. She looked up then, and I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Her eyes were the most beautiful shade of green I'd ever seen, but they were filled with such pain and resignation that it nearly broke my heart. There were tear tracks in the dust on her cheeks, and her lips were cracked from thirst. "Yes," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "My name is Samuel Hartwell. I have a ranch about 10 miles north of here. Would you like to get out of this, son?" She stared at me for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether this was another form of cruelty. I don't have any money to pay you. I didn't ask. For money? Then what do you want? The question was asked with the weariness of someone who had learned that kindness always came with a price. Nothing, I said simply. Just thought you might like some shade and a cool drink of water. The crowd behind me erupted in protests. Sam, you don't know what you're doing, called out Mrs. Prescott. She'll bring nothing but trouble, added the Reverend. I turned back to face them, my patience finally exhausted. The only trouble I see here is a bunch of so-called Christians who've forgotten what charity means. I looked back at the woman. The offer stands. Ma'am, no strings attached. She studied my face for another moment, then slowly nodded. Thank you, she whispered. I helped her to her feet, noting how unsteady she was. When was the last time she'd eaten, or slept in a real bed? What's your name? I asked, as I guided her toward my horse. Elizabeth, she said quietly. Elizabeth. Morrison. Well, Miss Morrison, Mrs., she corrected, then added bitterly. Though I suppose that doesn't matter anymore. I helped her up onto Thunder, then mounted behind her. The crowd watched in disapproving silence as we rode out of town, but I didn't care. I'd seen enough cruelty for one day. As we rode toward my ranch, I could feel Elizabeth's exhaustion and the way she leaned against me. She didn't speak, and I didn't push her. Whatever her story was, she'd tell it when she was ready if she ever was. The ranch came into view as the sun began to sink toward the western mountains. It wasn't much to look at: a modest house, a barn, some corrals, but it was home. More importantly, it was a place where Elizabeth could rest without being judged. It's not fancy, I said as we approached the house, but it's clean and quiet. It's beautiful, she said, and I could hear the tears in her voice. I helped her down from the horse and led her to the porch. There's a room you can use, I said. It belonged to my sister before she married and moved east. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. Elizabeth turned to look at me, those green eyes searching my face. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. I know enough, I said. I know you're tired and hungry and that you've been treated badly. That's enough for me. But what if they're right about me? What if I am what they say I am? I met her gaze steadily. Elizabeth, I don't care what you've done or what's been done to you. Everyone deserves basic human kindness. Everyone deserves a chance to start over. She broke down then, sobbing with the kind of desperation that comes from holding pain inside for too long. I wanted to comfort her, but I knew she needed space, needed to let it all out. Come on, I said gently when her sobs began to subside. Let's get you inside. You need food and rest. As I led her into the house, I couldn't help but wonder what had brought this obviously educated, well-bred woman to such a low point. But that was her story to tell, in her own time. What I did know was that the people of Cedar Ridge had shown their true colors today, and it wasn't pretty. They'd taken pleasure in another person's pain, justified their cruelty with righteousness, and called it Christian duty. Well, if that was Christianity, I wanted no part of it. I'd rather stand with the outcasts and the broken than with the self-righteous and cruel. As Elizabeth collapsed into the chair by my kitchen table, accepting the glass of water I offered with shaking hands, I made a silent promise. Whatever had happened to her, whatever had brought her to that church step in Cedar Ridge, she was safe now. And if anyone wanted to continue tormenting her, they'd have to go through me first. Elizabeth slept for nearly 18 hours straight. I checked on her periodically, making sure she was still breathing, still safe. When she finally emerged from the guest room, it was late afternoon of the following day. She looked better, still fragile, but the desperate exhaustion had lifted somewhat. I'm sorry, she said, standing uncertainly in the doorway of the kitchen. I didn't mean to sleep so long. You needed it, I said, setting down the account books I'd been working on. Are you hungry? She nodded, and I could see her fighting back tears again. I haven't eaten in, it's been a while. I prepared a simple meal: bread, cheese, some leftover stew, and watched as she ate with the careful restraint of someone who'd learned not to take food for granted. As she ate, I studied her more carefully in the better light of my kitchen. She was indeed beautiful, with delicate features and that striking auburn hair, but there were shadows under her eyes that spoke of more than just physical exhaustion, and a wariness in her manner that suggested she'd learned to expect the worst from people. Mr. Hartwell, she began when she'd finished eating. Sam, I corrected. Just Sam. Sam, she repeated, then took a deep breath. I owe you an explanation. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. You took me in when no one else would. You deserve to know what you've gotten yourself into. I leaned back in my chair. All right, I'm listening. Elizabeth stared down at her hands for a long moment before beginning. I was married to a man named Charles Morrison. We lived in Denver. He was a successful businessman, or so I thought. We had a nice house, servants, everything a woman could want. She paused, gathering strength to continue. Charles was charming, handsome. He swept me off my feet when I was 19. My parents thought it was a wonderful match. He was older, established, seemed to adore me. Seemed to? Elizabeth's laugh was bitter. Charles had a talent for appearing to be what people wanted him to be. To my parents, he was the perfect son-in-law. To his business associates, he was a shrewd but honest dealer. To me, he was the devoted husband, but he wasn't. No. Her voice dropped too barely above a whisper. He was a gambler, Sam, and not a good one. He'd been using his business as a front, embezzling money from his clients to cover his gambling debts. When it all came crashing down 3 months ago, he didn't just lose everything, he'd stolen everything. I felt a cold anger building in my chest. What happened to you? Charles disappeared in the middle of the night, taking what little cash was left. I woke up to find federal marshals at my door with warrants for his arrest. They seized everything, the house, the furniture, even my jewelry. Apparently, it had all been bought with stolen money. But you weren't involved in his crimes. No, but that didn't matter. In the eyes of the law, I was his wife. In the eyes of society, I was either complicit or a fool. Either way, I was ruined. Elizabeth stood and walked to the window, staring out at the mountains. The newspapers had a field day with the story. Society wife's fall from grace. The gambling man's abandoned bride. I became a cautionary tale, a source of entertainment for people who'd once called me friend. So you left Denver. I had to. I had no money, no friends willing to associate with me, nowhere to go. I sold the few personal items the marshals had overlooked and bought a train ticket west, thinking maybe I could start over somewhere. No one knew my story, but word travels fast in small towns. Elizabeth nodded, turning back to face me. Especially scandalous stories about fallen women. By the time I reached Cedar Ridge, someone had already heard about Charles Morrison's wife. I'd been there less than a day when the whispers started. What were you planning to do? I don't know, she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. I had hoped to find work, maybe as a seamstress or a teacher, but who would hire a woman with my reputation? I spent my last few dollars on a room at the boarding house, but when Mrs. Patterson heard who I was, she threw me out. So you ended up on the church steps. I had nowhere else to go. I thought maybe if I sat there long enough, someone would take pity on me, or maybe I'd just fade away. The pain in her voice cut through me like a knife. This woman had lost everything: her husband, her home, her reputation, her future through no fault of her own, and the world had responded by kicking her while she was down. Elizabeth, I said gently, look at me. She met my eyes, and I could see the shame and desperation there. None of this is your fault. You were betrayed by the man who was supposed to protect you, abandoned by the society that should have supported you, and judged by people who don't know the first thing about your character. But I should have known, she said, tears streaming down her face. I should have seen what Charles really was. You should have been able to trust your husband, I interrupted firmly. You should have been able to believe that the man you married was who he claimed to be. The fact that he wasn't is his failing, not yours. Elizabeth sank back into her chair, sobbing quietly. I wanted to comfort her, to somehow take away the pain she was carrying, but I knew words could only do so much. What happens now? She asked. When she'd composed herself somewhat. Now you rest, I said. You eat regular meals, you sleep in a real bed, and you give yourself time to heal. I can't stay here indefinitely, Sam. It wouldn't be proper. And besides, I can't pay you. I'm not asking for payment. And as for propriety, I think we're a bit beyond worrying about what people think, don't you? She almost smiled at that. I suppose we are. Elizabeth, I want you to listen to me carefully. You are welcome to stay here as long as you need to. I have plenty of room, and frankly, I could use the company. This ranch gets pretty lonely. But what will people say? Let them say what they want. The people in Cedar Ridge already think poorly of both of us, you for being a fallen woman, and me for defending you. We might as well give them something real to talk about. You don't understand, Elizabeth said urgently. Association with me will ruin your reputation too. You'll lose business. Friends, Elizabeth, I said, leaning forward. I've been alone on this ranch for 15 years. I have no close friends in town, and my business doesn't depend on their good opinion. I sell cattle to buyers who care about the quality of my stock, not my social standing. But surely you must want, I mean, don't you want to marry someday? Have a family? The question hit closer to home than she knew. I had wanted those things once, but life had taught me that wanting and having were two different things entirely. I'm 42 years old. Elizabeth, if I was going to find a wife and start a family, I probably would have done it by now. That's not true. You're still young enough to marry some respectable woman who would expect me to fit into polite society, to attend church socials and dinner parties with the same people who were tormenting you yesterday. I shook my head. I don't think so. Elizabeth studied my face carefully. You really don't care what they think, do you? Not anymore. Yesterday, watching those people take pleasure in your pain, I realized something. I'd rather be alone than be part of a community that treats people the way they treated you. You're a good man, Sam Hartwell. I'm just a man who believes in treating people decently. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the late afternoon sun streaming through the kitchen windows. Finally, Elizabeth spoke again. If I stay, I want to earn my keep. I can cook, clean, mend clothes. I was raised to manage a household. You don't need to. Yes, I do, she said firmly. I need to feel useful, to feel like I'm contributing something. Please. I could see how important this was to her, this need to maintain some dignity and purpose. All right. But you're not a servant, Elizabeth. You're a guest who happens to help out. Thank you. As evening approached, I showed Elizabeth around the ranch. explaining the daily routines and introducing her to the few ranch hands who lived on the property. To their credit, my men treated her with respect, tipping their hats and speaking politely. They were good men who knew better than to judge someone based on gossip. That night, as I sat on my porch, listening to the sounds of the evening, I reflected on how much my life had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday, I'd been a solitary rancher with a predictable routine. Today, I had a house guest whose presence had already begun to transform the atmosphere of my home. Elizabeth had brought something I hadn't realized I was missing: conversation, companionship, the simple pleasure of sharing meals with another person. But more than that, she'd reminded me of something important about myself, that I was willing to stand up for what was right, even when it cost me something. The people of Cedar Ridge could think what they wanted. I'd found something more valuable than their approval. I'd found my conscience, and a woman whose courage in the face of adversity had earned my deepest respect. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I was determined to face them. Elizabeth Morrison deserved a chance to rebuild her life, and I was going to make sure she got it. 3 weeks had passed since I'd brought Elizabeth to the ranch, and the transformation was remarkable. She'd gained weight, the shadows under her eyes had faded, and there was a spark of life returning to her that had been absent that first day. More importantly, she'd begun to smile tentatively at first. Then, with growing confidence, Elizabeth had indeed proven herself invaluable around the ranch. She cooked meals that were far better than anything I'd managed on my own, kept the house spotless, and had even begun helping with the account books. Her education, serving her well in managing the ranch's finances, but it was the small moments that meant the most: conversations over morning coffee, her laughter when one of the horses did something amusing, the way she hummed while working in the kitchen. The ranch felt alive in a way it never had before. Of course, our arrangement hadn't gone unnoticed in Cedar Ridge. I'd made my weekly trip to town for supplies, and the reception had been even chillier than usual. Conversations stopped when I entered the general store, and I caught more than a few disapproving glances. But I'd expected that, and it didn't bother me much. What did bother me was the visit I received on a Thursday morning from Reverend Collins and 2 of the town's leading citizens. I was repairing a section of fence when I saw them riding up the path to the house. Elizabeth was hanging laundry on the line, and I saw her freeze when she spotted the approaching riders. "Sam," she called out, her voice tight with anxiety. "I see them," I replied, setting down my tools and walking toward the house. "Go inside, Elizabeth, but please, let me handle this." She nodded and disappeared into the house, but I knew she'd be watching from the window. I waited on the porch as the 3 men dismounted and approached. "Reverend Collins," I said with a nod. "Mr. Prescott, Mr. Bradley, what brings you out here?" Reverend Collins stepped forward, his expression stern. "Sam, we need to talk. This situation has gone on long enough." "What situation would that be? Don't play dumb with us," snapped Harold Prescott, the banker. "The whole town knows you're harboring that woman." "Mrs. Morrison is my guest," I said evenly. I wasn't aware that hospitality had become a crime. "It's not hospitality we're concerned about," said Tom Bradley, the blacksmith. "It's the impropriety of the arrangement. An unmarried man and woman living together, it's scandalous." "Is it more scandalous than leaving a woman to starve in the street?" Reverend Collins cleared his throat. "Sam, we understand your charitable impulses, but this woman has a reputation. Her presence here reflects poorly on the entire community." "How so?" "People are talking," Prescott said. "They're saying Cedar Ridge is the kind of place where fallen women are welcomed, where moral standards don't matter." I felt my temper rising but kept my voice level. "And what exactly are you proposing I do about it?" "Send her away," Collins said bluntly. "Give her some money if you must, but get her out of the territory. She doesn't belong here." "Where does she belong, Reverend? Where exactly should a woman go when she's lost everything through no fault of her own?" "That's not our concern. It should be," I interrupted. "It should be every Christian's concern, but I suppose it's easier to cast stones than to offer help." Collins's face reddened. "How dare you question my faith?" "I'm not questioning your faith, Reverend. I'm questioning your compassion." The 3 men exchanged glances, and I could see they were preparing to take a harder line. "Sam," Prescott said, "we've been patient with you, but this has to end. If you don't send that woman away, we'll be forced to take action." "What kind of action?" "The kind that will make it very difficult for you to do business in Cedar Ridge," Bradley said ominously. "We have influence, Sam. We can make life very uncomfortable for you." I stared at them for a long moment, feeling a cold fury building in my chest. These men, these pillars of the community, were threatening me for showing basic human decency to a woman in need. "Gentlemen," I said quietly, "I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say." They leaned in slightly, expecting me to capitulate. "Mrs. Morrison is under my protection. She will remain here as long as she chooses to stay. If you or anyone else attempts to harm her or drive her away, you'll answer to me personally." "Sam, you're making a mistake," Collins began. "The only mistake I've made," I continued, "is thinking that the people of Cedar Ridge had any decency left in them. You've proven me wrong." "This isn't over," Prescott warned. "No, it's not," I agreed. because I'm going to make you a promise. If any harm comes to Mrs. Morrison, if she's threatened or mistreated in any way, I will hold each of you personally responsible, and I will respond accordingly." The threat was clear in my voice, and all three men took a step back. "You're choosing her over your own community," Bradley said incredulously. "I'm choosing right over wrong," I replied. "If that puts me at odds with this community, so be it." After they left, Elizabeth emerged from the house, her face pale. "Sam, I heard everything. You can't do this. You can't sacrifice your place here for me." "I'm not sacrificing anything worth keeping," I said firmly. "Elizabeth, those men just threatened to destroy my livelihood because I gave you shelter. What does that tell you about their character? It tells me they have power, and they're willing to use it. Let them try." Over the following days, the pressure began in earnest. When I went to town for supplies, I found that several merchants were suddenly out of stock of items I needed. The bank, run by Prescott, began making noises about calling in a loan that had never been a problem before. Even the post office seemed to be losing my mail. But I'd underestimated the character of some people. Jake Morrison, who ran the feed store, pulled me aside during one of my trips to town. "Sam," he said quietly, "I want you to know that not everyone in town agrees with what's happening. There are folks who think you did the right thing, taking in that woman. I appreciate that, Jake. More than that," he continued, "if you need supplies and the other merchants won't sell to you, you come to me. I'll make sure you get what you need." It turned out Jake wasn't alone. Dr. Patterson, the town physician, made a point of stopping by the ranch to check on Elizabeth's health, refusing payment for his services. Maria Santos, who ran the small Mexican restaurant, began sending food packages with Jake's deliveries, claiming she'd made too much and didn't want it to go to waste. Even some of the women in town, led by Sarah Mitchell, the young began quietly expressing their disapproval of how Elizabeth had been treated. It seemed that while the town's leaders were united in their condemnation, the ordinary people were more divided. The crisis came to a head 6 weeks after Elizabeth's arrival. I was in town picking up supplies when I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. "Tonight," Prescott was saying to a group of men outside the saloon, "we'll ride out there and settle this once and for all. Make it clear that her kind isn't welcome here." I didn't wait to hear more. I mounted Thunder and rode hard for the ranch, my mind racing. These men were planning something, and I had to get Elizabeth to safety. I found her in the kitchen, preparing dinner. "Elizabeth, we need to leave. Now, what's wrong?" "Some men from town are planning to come here tonight. I don't know exactly what they intend, but it won't be good." Elizabeth's face went white, but she didn't panic. "Where will we go?" "I have a friend with a ranch about 50 miles north. We can stay there until this blows over." "Sam, I can't keep running. I can't keep letting you sacrifice everything for me." "You're not making me do anything," I said firmly. "This is my choice." "But it's the wrong choice," she cried. "I'm not worth all this trouble." I stopped packing and turned to face her. "Elizabeth Morrison, you listen to me? You are worth every bit of trouble and more. You're worth standing up to bullies and hypocrites. You're worth losing the good opinion of people whose opinions aren't worth having." Tears streamed down her face. "Why? Why would you do all this for me?" I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to say would change everything between us. "Because I love you," I said simply. "I've loved you since that first day when I saw you sitting on those church steps, refusing to let them break your spirit. I love your courage, your dignity, your kindness. I love the way you've brought life back to this ranch and to me." Elizabeth stared at me in shock. "Sam, I know, it's complicated," I continued. "I know you're still legally married to a man who abandoned you. I know I'm asking you to tie yourself to someone who's now as much an outcast as you are, but I had to tell you." Elizabeth stepped closer to me, reaching up to touch my face. "Sam Hartwell, you are the best man I've ever known, and I love you too." Before I could respond, she kissed me, and in that moment, all the pain and uncertainty of the past weeks faded away. Whatever came next, we would face it together. We were interrupted by the sound of horses approaching, but instead of the angry mob I'd expected, I saw Jake Morrison riding up with Dr. Patterson and several other men from town. "Sam," Jake called out. "We came to warn you. Prescott and his bunch are planning to ride out here tonight." "I know," I said, stepping onto the porch with Elizabeth beside me. We were preparing to leave. "You don't have to," Dr. Patterson said. "We've been talking, and we've decided we've had enough of Prescott and his cronies running this town like their personal kingdom." "What do you mean?" "We mean," said another voice, "that it's time for some changes in Cedar Ridge." I looked up to see Sarah Mitchell approaching on horseback, followed by Maria Santos and several other women from town. "Mrs. Morrison," Sarah said, dismounting and approaching the porch, "I want to apologize for how you've been treated. It was shameful, and it doesn't represent the values this town should stand for." Elizabeth stepped forward, her hand still in mine. "Thank you," she said quietly. "We've been organizing," Jake explained. "Talking to people, making them understand what's really been happening here. Turns out most folks don't approve of Prescott's methods." "What about the Reverend?" I asked. Dr. Patterson snorted. "Collins has been asked to step down. Seems his version of Christianity doesn't sit well with a lot of his congregation." As the sun set, More people arrived at the ranch to drive Elizabeth away, but to show their support. When Prescott and his small group of followers finally appeared, they found themselves vastly outnumbered by townspeople who had decided that enough was enough. The confrontation was brief. Faced with the united opposition of most of the town, Prescott and his allies retreated, their threats empty in the face of popular disapproval. Later that evening, as the supporters gradually departed, Elizabeth and I sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now we build a life together," I said. "Your husband abandoned you, Elizabeth. In the eyes of God and man, you're free to make your own choices. And you choose me, I choose you," I confirmed. Scandal, reputation, and all. Elizabeth smiled, the first truly happy smile I'd seen from her. "Then I choose you too, Sam Hartwell, forever." 6 months later, we were married in a simple ceremony at the ranch, surrounded by the friends we'd made and the community we'd helped to change. The people of Cedar Ridge had learned an important lesson about the difference between righteousness and cruelty, between judgment and compassion, and I had learned that sometimes the greatest courage isn't in standing alone against the world, but in standing beside someone who needs you, no matter what the cost. Elizabeth and I built a good life together on the ranch, raising cattle and children, contributing to a community that had learned to value character over reputation. And every day I was grateful for that moment when I'd chosen to see past the mockery and the judgment to the woman who would become my heart, my partner, and my greatest blessing. The end.